I am Ghanwa Hakim, and you are watching The Arabic Hour. We would like to welcome to our program today Palestinian water rights expert Ziyad Yousef.
There's no semblance of normal life within those communities in Area C. The coercive environment that has been created for those communities, we say that water is life, has been, forced displacement of, hundreds and thousands every year from their homes as a result of, not having a semblance of normal life, of the daily violations of basic human rights, including the right to water.
To help us understand the issue of water, we welcome to our program Palestinian water rights expert Ziyad Yousef. In the past, Mr. Yousef had worked as the advocacy coordinator for the Emergency Water Sanitation and Hygiene Group, EWASH, a coalition of UN agencies and local and international NGOs based in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. Mr. Yousef will be joining us today via Skype.
Thank you, Ghanwa. We're very happy to welcome Ziyad Yousef to our program today. Ziyad, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Ziyad, you are a water expert, and the fighting in Gaza has again brought up the issue of water in addition to a whole plethora of political issues. As we know, in terms of looking at water, the Israelis, or the Zionist movement, as early as 1919, when they presented their map to the Paris Peace Conference of what they wanted for a state called Israel, transforming Palestine, that on it they had the Golan Heights, then called the Haran, the southern Lebanon to the Litani River, the Jordan River, and a little slice of East Jordan, and a little slice of the Sinai down to Eilat. And this really was composed to try to include sufficient water for what the Israelis felt would be a European style of life, what it would do for their commerce and agriculture and so forth. And since that map, and since they declared independence and fought the War of 48 and captured 78% of Palestine, they have continued to try to pursue control of more and more water. So I would like for you to give us your understanding of these Israeli policies regarding water and the way in which they use it politically against Palestinians under their control.
Sure. First of all, I think the main point that I want to put across is that water is political, especially here in this region. And it's a source of power because of the way the politics of the region have played since 1948, and even before, as you mentioned, with the presentation of the maps and where Israel wanted its borders to be located. And it has to be, this context of control and power has become really, really clear after 1967 when Israel took control of the West Bank and Gaza.
And the Golan Heights of Syria.
And the Golan Heights of Syria, exactly. What's really important to know, first of all, I think there's always a myth that, this region is a region scarce in water. And this is a myth. It couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, this area where, what we call historical Palestine, Lebanon, and so forth, is actually rich in water. It has vast underground water resources, as well as, overground rivers and lakes, and so on. And the areas where, one would consider that, they're water scarce, indeed there are deserts here, such as the Naqab in southern Israel and parts of the West Bank. Those areas are, naturally sparsely populated. But where people live, there is plenty of water available. The problem is, when how is the water distributed and shared within the region? Now, international law, international water law in particular, is very clear that this water has to be shared in a fair and equitable way. However,
are you talking about the riparian laws between states? Or are you? Yes.
The riparian law, indeed, the riparian law between states, but also the principle can be applied also with the human right to water.
Yeah, human rights. Everybody has a human right to water. Would you just before you go on tell our audience what the riparian laws are and what they mean? They're mostly customary at this point. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's mostly customary, but definitely widely acceptable. That for transboundary water resources such as rivers and underground water resources and lakes and so on, they have to be shared between countries in a fair and equitable way. And this is a language that is contained within the water law. It's not specific. It doesn't tell us, exactly how much per country, but one has to consider the size of the population, the level of economic development, cultural issues, and so forth. When countries share water, but those principles of fair and equitable, even though they're broadly defined and they're not defined in a concrete way, it's very clear that we are not even close to approaching the issue of fair and equitable share of water resources in this region, because as I was saying, Israel has controlled all of the water resources.
And in fact, there was an attempt in the 50s in the Johnson Plan to effect some sort of sharing of water between the riparian countries, Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, and that was never ratified. And so there really is no agreement, and Israel now draws about 1/3 of its water use from the Jordan River, especially since they have the headwaters in the Golan Heights now. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and the reason that the Johnson Plan was rejected at the time was because, it has been a constant of Israeli policy, is its unilateralism. Israel was already in an advanced stage of building, a national water carrier to, take water from the Jordan River system, which includes rivers from, the Golan Heights, from Lebanon. It's a transboundary system with several riparians, but Israel was already in a process of unilaterally taking the water from, the Lake Tiberias and so on. So the plan would not bow well for those advanced, infrastructural development plans that it had in mind. So it rejected and went ahead with unilateral plans. And this is, until today, unilateralism has been the mantra of Israeli policy, both towards the Palestinians and also its neighbors, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan.
Let me just interrupt you for a minute, Ziyad, and make sure that you discuss the aquifers in the Palestinian areas, where they're located, and basically how the Israelis control them. These are the sources of water for Israel and Palestine, and most of those aquifers are located under Palestinian ground. Is that correct? Could you just talk about that? We'll have a map of the aquifers on the screen shortly. Go ahead.
Yes. So the West Bank, in particular, is rich of underground water resources. One has a tendency to think that the Middle East is dry, and people think of camels when they think about the Middle East. But as I said, there is plenty of water resources, and the West Bank is one of those places. During the winter, the precipitation levels are particularly high. And, we think of London, for example, as a particularly gray city where it regularly rains. And, when we think of London, I think the first thing that people think is rain. But Ramallah, which is a city on the West Bank, it rains more in Ramallah than it rains in London on a given year. And this will come as a surprise to many. So this is just to say that there is a lot of water, and Palestinians would not have a problem with water if it wasn't what is happening now, which is basically all of that water, 100% of that water is fully under Israeli control. And the consequences of that control is that the majority of the water that is extracted from the aquifers underneath the West Bank, 90% goes to Israel. And Palestinians in the West Bank, who make up the majority of the population in the West Bank over the settlers, they get only 10% on the water extracted from the aquifer, even though under international law and under transboundary water law, they would be entitled to much more of their water. As a result, Palestinians do not have their water rights realized. The human right to water is 100 liters, a minimum of 100 liters per person per day under World Health Organization standards.
That's to prevent disease and for agricultural use. I mean, that's the minimum amount.
Excluding agricultural use. This is only for domestic water.
Only for domestic.
And so on. The human right to water is 100 liters per person per day. Palestinians on average, both in the West Bank and Gaza, have access to about 60 to 70 liters per person per day. But even that amount is uneven. In Area C of the West Bank, which is an area which Israel has full control over, and there is no presence of the Palestinian Authority, and that makes 60% of the West Bank, Palestinians live with as little as 25 liters per person per day. And this is well below the human right to water. And we can compare these levels of access to water to sub-Saharan Africa or situations of chronic emergency, such as following the earthquake in Haiti and so on. But there is no emergency in the West Bank. It's a water scarcity which is caused as a result of the deliberate withholding of water from a people on behalf of another people. And I say this because in those particular communities in the West Bank where the water consumption is so low, at 25 liters per person per day, only meters away from those communities we have Israeli settlements. And water consumption in those settlements, and I'm saying this excluding agriculture, can go as high as 800 liters per person per day. So it's really not an issue of water scarcity. It's really an issue of
how they distribute it and how they hold it back when they want to use it politically against Palestinians. How many settlers are there in the West Bank and East Jerusalem? These are occupied territories by Israel in 1967. How many settlers are there?
In total, in the whole of the West Bank, there's over 500,000 settlers already, 200,000 in East Jerusalem, and about 300,000 in the rest of the West Bank. One would ask, I would say, what's the reason for this policy? So we know the facts that, Palestinian communities, do not have the human right to water, and settlers have a lot of water. But I think the main question here, beyond knowing the facts, is what is the purpose of these policies? They do have a purpose.
Yes, and please elaborate.
So if you look at what's happening in communities, living in Area C, in particular of the West Bank, who are close.
Yeah, before you go on, would you define areas A, B, and C, which grew out of the Oslo agreements? Please define those for our audience, and then discuss the water issue related to them.
Sure. I hope you can also put a map of Area A, B, and C. So basically, Area A and Area B's are areas within the West Bank that the Palestinian Authority can provide services to the population, and it has a presence with the population. And this makes 40% of the West Bank, excluding East Jerusalem. Area C makes up the majority of the West Bank, 60%. And this is where actually the land mass of the West Bank is located. So areas A and B are mostly populated areas. Area C, there is a significant Palestinian population of about 300,000 people, but also it's where the natural resources and the space for development of the West Bank exists. And together, areas A, B, and C fragment the West Bank and cut the West Bank into several pieces. So if you look at the map, you would see that areas A, B, and C are not contiguous, so they make small islands within the West Bank and fragment the political space and the contiguity of the Palestinian populated spaces in favor of contiguity of Israel proper and the West Bank.
So actually the areas A and B, which the Palestinians, they control 18%, both civilly and for security, but in Area B they only have civil control, and these are fragmented into 64 cantons and could be grouped into sort of 3 different kind of Bantustans, so that if the Palestinian Water Authority wanted to build any infrastructure, it would be very difficult to do in those areas because they are so fragmented, and the wall also is a factor. Is this correct?
Yes, absolutely. But going back to the theme of water, I mean, the purpose of the policy of withholding water is what we have been verifying among the 300,000 plus population living in Area C alongside Israeli settlements, which is, displacement. And this has been emphasized in most of, the UN reports on this topic. Not only Palestinians, cannot have access to water for drinking, but also for their livelihoods, as well as they cannot build homes, and there's no semblance of normal life within those communities in Area C. And what the coercive environment that has been created for those communities, we say that water is life, has been forced displacement of hundreds and thousands every year from their homes as a result of not having a semblance of normal life, of the daily violations of basic human rights, including the right to water. And as a result, it allowed for settlements to take over more land, for settlements to continue to grow and expand their areas of reach. In particular, settlements, they live mostly, especially the settlements in the West Bank, as opposed to the more urbanized settlements within East Jerusalem, they live on agriculture. And this agriculture that's, it's dependent on huge consumptions of water, which in turn, the crops that the settlements produce are used to export to markets in Europe in particular, but also to the United States. So it's really, there is also the economic dimension of, control of land, of resources, because it's a source of economic income in addition to, which is highly dependent on having demand from international markets. So in effect, we have consumers in Europe and consumers in the US, purchasing settlement products which come from the theft of Palestinian water, in effect subsidizing that unjust situation that you are seeing on the ground here in the West Bank.
Tell us, Ziyad, I mean, the main purpose of this political use of water, favoring Israeli Jewish population, especially the settlements, which are green and have swimming pools, and even dump some of their garbage into Palestinian water resources. Is it designed to squeeze Palestinians off the land, make their life unlivable? And what is the main purpose of this water policy?
I would say it's dual policy. So I already mentioned, the aspect of pushing Palestinians out of certain areas,
yes,
into confined ghettos. But there's another dimension which is also very, very clear, and I described a little bit on my previous answer, that it's also there's the economic dimension. So Israel is also profiting from the appropriation of Palestinian water resources in 2 ways. It's profiting from Palestinians themselves. So as I mentioned, Palestinians can only extract about 10% of water from the aquifer, the 90%, of the water from the West Bank aquifers go to Israel. But then, Israel sells the water back to Palestinians. So they do extract, the water on the aquifers in the West Bank, and then that water is sold to Palestinians, which, creates, it creates dependence of Palestinians with Israel. They would, in theory, if Palestinians were able to have sovereignty over their water resources, they would be able to extract the water themselves and have independence and be able to devise their own economic policies on the basis of the water they would have available. Now, every single year, Palestinians have to bargain the amount of water that they would have access to from Israel. And especially during the summer months where the consumption of water naturally rises, it's a yearly struggle of the Palestinian Authority to negotiate with Israel extra, they call it extra, amounts of water, and also they come at exorbitant prices for Palestinians. So that's one way that Israel, profits from the creation of a captive water market based on, the water that it illegally appropriates from Palestinians. And the second element is, the international market is, the appropriation of, the control of water in the West Bank and the way Israel markets itself globally as a leader in water management and so on. It's also a way for them to, to profit from this control of water. And I'll give you one example. Mekorot, which is the Israeli national water carrier, has built several contracts in Europe. And the expertise that they are selling to European water providers is the one of security. So they say that they want to come to European markets to help secure the water network of European cities from terrorist attacks and so on. Where does Mekorot bring this alleged expertise on security? It's on the back of Palestinians, and this is a theme that is replicated throughout all of the sectors of water, be it with the technology that Israel wants to sell, which is heavily based on the military industry that Israel has.
Yes, so they're certainly been selling that here in Massachusetts, that they have expert water technology, water treatment, water conservation, and looking forward to having contracts with paired companies here in order to have a global market. So you're telling us that that image of superior technology is not necessarily true. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'll give you one example. I mean, one of the main things that Israel says that they developed the drip irrigation. It's to save water, and they conserve water, and they sell the idea that Israel is a country in the desert. And I already said this is not correct. But if you look at the facts, and I think we should always focus on the facts rather than the discourse, an average Israeli citizen would consume per capita 300 liters of water per person per day. If you look at an average European, certainly in France or Germany, the average French would consume at about 150 liters per person per day. So Israel is a water waster, and you look at this also, by the amount of by the type of agriculture that Israel has adopted here, which is not, the type of agriculture that is indigenous to this region, which consumes exorbitant amounts of water, which is unsustainable in the long term, and it's dependent on this type of water that that of Palestinians, basically, in effect. So this contract that you just mentioned, between Massachusetts and Israeli technological company, I think the question that the state has to ask, and the citizens of the state have to ask, is: do you want to have contracts with companies which are deeply complicit in violations of international law, and whether these contracts are in fact compatible with the stated values and the Constitution, of the United States. These contracts, which involved money and involves recognition and involves legitimacy and so on, one would be emboldening those policies instead of saying we do not wish to be associated with those gross violations of international law and human rights.
You are watching a Skype interview with Dr. Elaine Hagopian featuring Palestinian water rights expert Ziyad Yousef. Stay tuned. We'll discuss water issues in the context of the recent Israeli assault on Gaza after this short program ID.
You are watching The Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous program, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.
Due to technical difficulties and the importance of the topic being discussed, the remainder of the interview will proceed with audio only.
Let's get to the Oslo Interim Agreement on water. That was 1995, and they said basically after 5 years they would be going towards final status, and it was those agreements were masterful in their vagueness, and in fact there is no final status, and there has been no adjustment in terms of water for Palestinians. And even though there is a Palestinian Water Authority that was created at that time, the water is actually turned on by the Israelis, and the Water Authority can only distribute what it gets from the Israelis. And then, as you said, Palestinians are forced to buy their own water from an Israeli national carrier at exorbitant prices, and not everybody can afford it. So the Israelis can turn the tap on and off whenever they want. They also, as part of the interim agreements, they formed a joint committee to make decisions about water as part of the Oslo agreements, but that actually gave a veto power to Israel. So could you discuss the Oslo interim agreements and the joint water committee that was supposed to be equitable in terms of water distribution, and where we are now post-Oslo?
The main point I want to make about Oslo is that, first of all, Oslo institutionalized the pre-existing water inequality. So Oslo, on paper, recognized that Palestinians have water rights, and it stated, on Article 40 of the Oslo Accords, that Palestinians do have water rights. So this is the first line. And then on subsequent lines, it does everything to shred those rights into pieces. So that's the irony of Oslo. It has Article 40, and it starts by saying Palestinians have water rights, and then the text below it completely shreds those rights into pieces and renders them meaningless. And
can you give us an example of how they were shredded?
Well, the most starting example is that Oslo delineated concretely the amount of water that Palestinians and Israelis can abstract from the aquifers underneath the West Bank. And basically what Oslo said was that 80% of the water from the aquifers on the West Bank should go to Israel, and 20% will go to Palestinians for this interim period of 5 years until 1999.
They also said that they understood that there needed to be additional water from other sources, which they never specified.
Yes, and the additional water were to be realized within this 5 years of interim period, but it wouldn't affect the overall allocation of water, which was hugely skewed in favor of Israel, and it's sort of and it institutionalized the Palestinian independence. So the whole premise of Oslo, not only on water but for everything else, is really just to institutionalize a pre-existing independence, and do so, unfortunately, with the consent of the Palestinians, because in fact the PLO did sign Oslo and did accept on this inequality. But let's just also emphasize that no agreement can trump the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people enshrined under international law. So the many aspects of Oslo, including the aspects of water, cannot trump the rights that Palestinians have to the water over the aquifer, which is regardless of Oslo, and it's above Oslo. So the argument that often Israel says that, the Palestinians signed Oslo and the inequality of water was enshrined there, but this is what they accepted under international law and human rights law and so on, it doesn't stand to scrutiny. In addition to Oslo being an interim agreement which has, in theory, expired a long time ago, and that Israel disregards almost completely on paper and in practice.
Now, Ziyad, we also know that the Palestinians developed cisterns, and they have this joint committee between Israel and Palestinians that was created by Oslo. But the point is that every time the Palestinians suggest an infrastructure or to improve their water in the areas they govern, the Israelis, in fact, veto a lot of these. It's hard enough, since it's fragmented, to do this, but they veto a lot of these. Can you tell us a little bit more about this joint committee and some of the things that they have vetoed?
Yes, so under Oslo, whenever Palestinians would want to develop their water network, they would have to submit their project proposals to this body called the Joint Water Committee, which is a committee formed of equal number of Israelis and Palestinians, and the committee would assess the project proposal, and it would technically approve it, and Palestinians would go ahead and implement the project on the ground. For example, if Palestinians want to dig a well, they would submit a proposal to the Joint Water Committee that they would like to dig a well, and the well would extract X amount of water, and so forth. And the committee would assess, made of Israelis and Palestinians, and then they would grant approval or suggest an alternative to the project or ask for some amendments. The Joint Water Committee from the very beginning was touted as an example of cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians. However, as an academic from the UK, Jan Selby, has eloquently argued and proven in his several academic papers, Joint Water Committee was again a tool for control and domination. And in fact, what happened within this Joint Water Committee is every time Palestinians brought projects to develop their water resources, such as building wells, connecting communities to the water network, building wastewater treatment plants, and so forth, what they were met was that Israel used their veto power within the committee. So whereas Palestinians, would bring in projects in the spirit of how the committee was built, Israel was the sole party within this committee with veto power, and basically the work of the committee was rendered dysfunctional because Palestinians would not be able to develop their water resources, building wells and wastewater treatment plants, because the veto power is applied within a Joint Water Committee. So the whole idea of Joint Water Committee being an example of cooperation or Oslo, it's really just an image and a facade, and it was just an instrument for further cementing this Palestinian independence on Israel. And if you look at the water allocations that Palestinians were given under Oslo, they did not even need these water allocations. In fact, Palestinians today extract less water from the West Bank aquifers than they did before Oslo. So the water consumption of Palestinians has decreased, the water that they extract from the aquifers. And this is because every time they propose projects to the Joint Water Committee for extracting more water under Oslo, they were met with vetoes from the Israeli side.
Part of the Joint Water Committee's authority, so to speak, is that they can also approve or disapprove of any wells that the Palestinians might want to dig in order to get water from the aquifers. And we know from the World Bank report from 2009 to 2011 that they destroyed something like 200 wells and cisterns, which the Palestinians try to accumulate rainwater. We also know that the occupying forces quite often just shoot up some of these water tanks, some of these cisterns for no particular reason. And so that there is harassment involved also in any attempt that the Palestinians might use to try to increase their water supply. Is that correct?
I can give you some figures. You know, the human rights organizations have started monitoring the destruction of water infrastructure in the West Bank since 2009.
Yes.
And from there on until 2013, the number of infrastructure that has been destroyed by the Israeli army has increased exponentially. So in 2010, for example, 57 water and sanitation infrastructure were destroyed, belonging to Palestinian communities were destroyed by the Israeli army, such as, for example, 12 wells, 5 springs, 21 cisterns, 19 tanks, 17 latrines or sanitary units. Come 2013, 62 water and sanitation infrastructure have been destroyed by the Israeli army belonging to Palestinian communities, such as 22 tanks, 15 cisterns, 1 well, 5 pipelines. It's correct what you said. There is systematic destruction of Palestinian water and sanitation infrastructure in the West Bank.
And for days they turn off the water, especially in the summer. Does this increase with some political factor, or is this just at random?
It's part of the dependency and control mechanism. As I mentioned, every year during the summer, Palestinians have to negotiate, quote unquote, extra amounts of water.
Yes.
For the increase of the summer increase. And it's really part of the, the whole idea of, who is the landlord of this land, and who does the water belong to. And every year we come to a situation where large cities like Bethlehem of international significance, they go for 2-3 weeks consecutively without water, to the point that it causes social instability. And people in Bethlehem, for example, protest on an annual basis during the summer because this condition becomes so untenable. And also, Bethlehem is a city where tourism is a lifeline for the city. And if the hotels cannot operate without water, and the businesses cannot sustain without water, that means they will lose the bulk of the tourists visiting the city. And where would they go? They would stay in Israeli hotels, and they would make use of Israeli services and so on.
And this is especially true around Christmas time, when many pilgrims come to Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. So that it is a really difficult time for the people who live there and the businesses that are run.
Yes, that is correct.
Ziyad, can we, for a moment, turn to Gaza, because Gaza is slightly different. As you know, the settlers were pulled out by Sharon in 2005. Their water comes from an aquifer, the coastal aquifer, which runs from Israel into Gaza, but they are only able to pump a certain amount of water. Their population has increased. With the blockade that has been in existence for years, they haven't been able to import the kinds of materials to improve their water treatment and sewage treatment. Consequently, they have overpumped the water in Gaza, and now there is seawater that has been seeping in, and with the recent conflagration, the treatment of sewerage has been impossible, and that's going into the sea. But can you tell us what the water regime has been like before and after the present conflagration? Of course, there have been many in Gaza.
Sure. As we saw in the news during this latest offensive, almost the totality of the population in Gaza was deprived of water access in their homes. And this was during a period where people could difficultly venture outside to reach for supplies. And one of the reasons that water stopped flowing from people's taps is because there was a lack of electricity. The water networks operate from the electricity networks. In addition, the power plant was bombed, which means that the access to water situation in Gaza will extend for several months and even longer. And this is a continuation of an already dire situation. On about 50% of Gaza's population receives water only for a few hours every 3 to 4 days. So it's already an ongoing situation where people don't have water in their taps. In addition to, during the last offensive, they were fully deprived of water supply from their homes. Assessments are still being made, but Israel also destroyed, through the airstrikes, water infrastructure, which led also to sewage to run into the streets, and it killed...
It's a real health hazard.
And it killed municipal employees as well, who were trying to secure the maintenance of the system during the war, to the point that the municipal authorities have to announce that they would suspend their technical operations on the ground until there were assurances from Israel that their employees would not be targeted.
But they have willingly bombed these water facilities in Gaza, and the Gazans are now, Gazan Palestinians are now dependent on outside water, humanitarian resources.
The water availability in Gaza is indeed very limited. The aquifer that serves Gaza is overexploited. The water is unsuitable for human consumption, and most of the water that Palestinians in Gaza drink is desalinated water of very low quality, which then results in diseases for the population, and it's generally a public health risk. 1 in 5 children suffers from watery diarrhea, for example, in Gaza. It exacerbates problems like anemia, the incidence of blue baby syndrome. In addition to the long-term view, the UN says that by 2020, the aquifer underneath Gaza will be rendered unusable. So even now that the water is unsuitable for human consumption, in the following years, due to the increase in the number of population and overexploitation of those resources, they won't be able to even extract water from the ground. So,
in fact, there are predictions that Gaza will not be livable by 2020 because of the total destruction, the unleashing of all kinds of health issues, and the water and electric supply. So that also is very concerning. I would like to add here that Gaza, that part of Palestine, has always troubled Israel from the inception. As you know, it really wanted those refugees who make up the majority of the Palestinian population in Gaza. They really wanted Egypt to take them. And at one point, Ben-Gurion almost restarted the 48 war to try to get Egypt to take them. And then they tried to get Jordan to become responsible for them. The location of the all-Gaza, all-Palestine government after the 48 war was located in Gaza, even though the powers that be, including Jordan, cooperated in a way to get rid of that government. It went to Egypt but didn't sustain itself. The resistance has always been a factor coming out of Gaza. And so the constant attack on Gaza and the destruction of its basic living structures, its structures for living water and electricity, has been a kind of symbol of Israeli determination to destroy this population and make the move. What are your thoughts on that?
The most important thing to understand regarding Gaza, and people often misconstrue this, especially recently, is Gaza has never been an independent unit historically.
Yeah, that's correct.
There was never a unit called Gaza. Gaza was always part of the broader historical Palestine and the broader region, and it was always a point of rest for the caravans moving between North Africa and the Levant. And this unit called the Gaza Strip was only formed as a result of influx of refugees after 48. And so Gaza is not physically made to sustain the number of population that it has, which is about 80% of them are refugees. And the problems that we are seeing Gaza facing in regards to water is that it's unsurprising. It's just the result of the population pressures and the result of the influx of refugees into that tiny strip. And the public discourse of Gaza, and this is indeed also an Israeli policy, is to build Gaza in people's minds as if Gaza was an independent unit that should survive with its own water and like a normal country would. The reality is Gaza will never survive with its own water. Gaza has Palestinians living in there, and Palestinians as a whole, as a people, have rights over the water, within historical Palestine, which includes the water in the West Bank, which is only about 30 kilometers away. And the real solution for Gaza would be to bring in water from the West Bank, which is a plenty and would be enough to meet the needs of Palestinians in Gaza. So that's the real solution for Gaza. Instead of building a discourse of poor Gaza with no natural resources. Of course Gaza has no natural resources because Gaza was never meant to be, and it was only a result of the mass forced displacement and expulsion from 1948.
You know, I think people don't realize that Gaza is a very tiny entity. It is only about 27 miles long, and at its widest point is only about 10 miles wide, and has about 1.8 million people there. It's the most highly densely populated area in the world. And it is part of Palestine, but the Israelis have always tried to make them as though the West Bank and Gaza were two separate entities. In fact, they are not. They're part of the same problem. Let us turn to something else. Can I just ask you to comment on two things? One, on the economic peace impact. This is the economic peace of Netanyahu on the water sector. Especially give us one example of a project that they want to do that is not necessary. And the other is to summarize the health and economic impact of the Israeli water policies.
I did touch about it already, but you can, that the whole idea of turning water into a private market for profit making on the back of Palestinian dependence on the captive market of water. And they're doing the same thing for Gaza, and it brings this conversation very well in the fact that I said that, Gaza is not a country. You cannot expect Gaza to solve its water problems alone. It's part of the broader water system which surrounds it, and it has rights into the water of the West Bank. But the solution that both Israel as well as the international donors are seeking for Gaza is that Gaza builds a desalination plant as a solution for the lack of water that it has. The problem with this answer to the water problem of Gaza is twofold. First of all, you don't need a multi-billion-dollar desalination plant for Gaza, when all that you need is an almost cost-free solution, which is to have a pipeline connecting Gaza with its rightful share of water from the aquifers very close by in the West Bank. So that in itself is an economic solution to Gaza, which defies international law principles, and it's to sidetrack the idea that Palestinians have water rights that can easily be realized if the governments play their roles in holding Israel accountable for those violations. That's number one. Number two is the whole idea of how unsustainable having a desalination plant in Gaza is, which will also open another Pandora box for Gaza. First of all, how expensive it is to run a desalination plant, which would then trickle down on prices of water for an already impoverished population. Second, that Gaza doesn't even have electricity because as you saw, Israel repeatedly bombed the power plant, but also how are we running an energy intensive water desalination plant when Gaza doesn't even have electricity for its most basic needs? It also defies basic common sense. In addition, as you saw, whenever there is an offensive, Israel has bombed civilian infrastructure in Gaza, like they did bomb the airport that the Spanish built in Gaza during the Second Intifada. What guarantees are there that they wouldn't go and bomb, this billion-dollar desalination plant that they have planned, which is being funded by American taxpayers, European taxpayers, and so on. So it's really a way to subcontracting Israel's occupation to the international community and give it responsibility over its failed policies and policies of oppression.
And such a point. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Move on to your second point, which is your second question on the overall consequences of Israel's water policy. So then I can conclude with the interview. And this is basically, the crux of the conflict as a whole. So the violations of Palestinian rights to water as well as violations of other Palestinian rights, the bottom line is that these violations are all about continuous and permanent control and dependency, and removing any sense of sovereignty and self-determination for Palestinians, which in turn is being carried forward with support directly or indirectly of the international community, both direct governmental support, which, instead of holding Israel accountable, they provide these expensive solutions for Palestinian water problems, which are nothing to do with the problem itself, in addition to all the business contracts that third countries are providing to those same companies which are directly complicit with those violations of international law, which is the case of the contract in your state. And I do think that people have a responsibility, and I would like to finish the interview with a call for action. People do have a responsibility to do something, and they can do something. Because they are part of the problem by consuming those settlement products, the herbs and the fruits and vegetables that are in the U.S. markets and European markets, which grow from the theft of Palestinian water. They are subsidizing the settlements, and by making business contracts with the technology companies, which are building this so-called expertise off the back of oppression of Palestinians, they're subsidizing this oppression. So their idea really is for people of conscience, citizens, to fight those contracts and to oppose those contracts, and to make sure that their taxpayers are not being used for complicity of the oppression of Palestinians and violations of international law. And in the case of your state, which I'm having difficulties in pronouncing,
Massachusetts, yes.
What citizens should be doing is to really oppose these contracts on the basis of respect for international law, and perhaps finding alternatives which are more ethical and are not built on oppression.
Well, thank you very much, Ziyad.
Thank you as well. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be in your program.
Well, we appreciate your taking the time to talk to us, and we'll hope to contact you again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
That was our interview with Palestinian water rights expert Ziyad Yousef, discussing the water situation in the occupied Palestinian territories. Stay with us. We'll be back after this short break.
You are watching the Arabic Hour, a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.
Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of the volunteer staff here at the Arabic Hour, this is Ghanwa Hakim, and I look forward to seeing you next week.